All right, so my thesis project is an alternative game controller for learning, where I'm essentially designing an input system so that it is mapped to the learning content itself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and why I'm doing that. So with learning games in general, they are these immersive formats and engaging formats for students to learn in informal settings. And reason why I want to explore this and like input systems is so that we are essentially engaging in more physical and mapped experiences that then translate into this physical form of information processing or or somatosensory. Essentially, I'm exploring more of those like embodied learning and cognition pathways and trying to translate that into older learners to have those abstract thinking skills, but whose education may more so, formal education may more so rely on that because they are able to do so rather than like integrating more concrete um, and physical learning factors. And I want to have a more intentional input design as opposed to just a mouse that controls a computer or a cursor on a computer or a game controller that's typical that has like an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller. I want to explore differentiated input systems and a differentiated controller so that it's mapped to the learning content. And so I'm wondering with this thesis project, how might an alternative game controller affect learning outcomes? And so essentially part one of my thesis project is building an alternative game controller. And then part two is to actually study the effect of integrating that controller with a learning game and seeing if having something that's more um, grounded in the learning mechanics and the game mechanics then translate into um, better learning outcomes, which includes professional self-identity, communities of practice, and like establishing and fermenting students in those spaces that they could be in and feel fostering a feeling of being uh, in those spaces and longitudinal retention. So, can they remember the information better? And finally, embodied cognition and physical mental model construction, which means more so how are they thinking through their body? Do they have a form of muscle memory that then allows them to integrate or instinctually rely on like gestures and similar like physical movements that they performed with the controller while they were interacting with it. Integrating learning mechanics and core mechanics into the input design is the goal for at least for my first semester when I'm trying to build out the design. And so that kind of looks like this piano I made. So in terms of user research, I really wanted to study people's physical gestures before and after encountering Cosmos simulation on the moon phases, which is something I helped to design. And so that's going to be the content that I'm framing my alternate controller around. And so you can see that people are moving their hands in similar ways in rotational, like circular motions around what they represent as the earth. And so I also looked into what aspects they found important, and uh, those things included color and shape when picking out the objects of choice to help them explain how the moon phases work. Then I looked at some inspiration of alternative controllers, or actually I did this throughout, use that to help me ideate. And so I also used existing controllers and thought about what that looked like. And then I actually took apart a Quest controller, and then on the right, you see an Xbox controller, and just like thinking about that as like the basis of a traditional game controller and why. My controller design I was thinking about that rotational movement and ways in which to integrate that. And then I was also thinking around ergonomics and what feels comfortable in the hand. And then using that Play-Doh modeling and translating that, measuring it, translating it into actual 3D models, and then 3D printing those. So this is kind of what my fabrication process looked like. So there's 3D printing, we have soldering, we have vacuum forming, really putting it together a bit more, doing a low fidelity prototype and seeing how and doing more prototyping of the electronics, seeing how I can use gestures within the controller design. And then I integrated it into a P5 JS or JavaScript simulation that I made. And you can kind of see how the rotation is mapped to the movement of the moon in the simulation. And here's a closer look at some of the code. And I wanted to do that before I jumped into plugging it into Unity. So next steps are to finish the controller manufacturing and make a more high fidelity design. And then that can be integrated within VR or the 2D simulation that we made and I helped create. And then second is to create the research design document, which I have a good understanding of how and what I want to study, and also doing piloting, user testing, all of that. I perform the research and analyze the data, and those are kind of the stages that I'm looking forward to next semester. So stay with me. Yeah, thank you.